Police of Reddit, what is the absolute worst crime scene you've come across? Little girl tells her school nurse it hurts to pee. This leads to her making statements indicating molestation, so they send her to hospital and call me. SANE nurse confirms there is trauma to her vagina. Because she is a child, I cannot ask her questions. We set up a forensic interview with people trained to deal with this so it is less stressful, but I can listen in while she is talking to doctors. I hear her say, when I'm bad mommy and uncle bad touch, name changed for privacy, stick fingers inside me. So now I go find mom. Expecting to hear complete denial. Nope. She tells me as a form of punishment she inserts fingers into her 5-year-old's vagina. Her brother, who lives with her, is it also. I wish I was making this up. Before you ask. The case was sent to the county prosecutor. I haven't heard anything from it since, which means she pleaded out. It was dropped. Or it's still awaiting trial. Didn't see firsthand, but saw some of the scene photos. 23-year-old guy was babysitting girlfriend's daughter while she was at work. The guy got drunk and arped the little girl. She was less than a year old. The guy apparently realized how horrible he was immediately after, because he put a bullet through his head. The mother came home from work to find her bloody baby in the boyfriend's lap with the contents of his head sprayed all over the baby and entryway. The little girl lived, but was in critical condition for weeks. The bag boyfriend had penetrated the girl's abdomen. Dr. was certain she'd never be able to have kids. She should be in high school by now. 15 or 16 I would guess. Okay, that's the one. No more internet for the day. I saw 4 guys blown away with a AK-47 that had a double drum clip. One guy's face looked like the Predator. I had a 9-person shooting another time. Last month I cut a lady down who hung herself from the 3rd floor balcony. The neighbors in the 2nd floor found her hanging outside their porch window when they woke up for work. I probably have been to at least 20 shootings. Not sure what the worst is. I have seen a few jumpers. Worst calls are children. I have seen a few killed by cars. Grossest calls are burns. Saw 2 people tied to chairs. One was shot. The house was set on fire. The one who lived was the one who was shot. That was a bad call. But I am a firefighter, so I don't know if this counts. The op was asking cops. An older co-worker told me this one. A man lived in an apartment with his 3 kids and wife. He goes to work and comes home at night. When one of his kids comes up to him and says, "I saw mommy kissing the neighbor's pee-pee," he slit each of his children's throats while they slept and cut his wife's head off. Left it on the kitchen table and smoked a cigarette calmly after calling 911 on himself. Said seeing the kids in their beds covered with open throats covered in blood ate him up for a long time. I know a guy who is a jail guard. And he also worked in TBS, Dutch equivalent of jail for people with severe mental health problems. There was this schizophrenic guy who was convinced he was a dog. Now that might just sound sad and pathetic, but the guy actually bit someone in the throat and shredded his jugular. He tried to do it in jail as well. And he now has to wear a muzzle 24/7. I have a feeling the muzzle doesn't help much with his delusions. Edit. I know that he has a muzzle so he doesn't rip any more throats out. I was simply making an amusing observation. Thank you. Not a cop, but I did body removals for the private ambulance company I worked at. We got a call at 4 AM and our dispatcher asked us if we had 2 body bags. We did. We got there and the gist of it was that it was a double RP homicide of 2 elderly women in their 70s. One was found with her pants around her ankles in one room. And the other was found in the bedroom down the hall with her hands pinned above her head underneath the bed frame. I have no idea if they ever caught the guy. I just pick up the bodies and take them to the morgue. Pretty messed up though. Not police, but my father was a detective in the middle of his career. He told me of a crime scene where someone had hacked up his wife's head with an axe. And they went in. The family's dog was licking up blood and brain matter. Our animal's been Bryce. A guy came back mid-deployment and asked his wife for an Xbox. She stated that they didn't have enough money and they started arguing about finances. The guy leaves his house and comes back a short while later when his wife is in the shower. He drags his wife out of the shower and puts her head in between the toilet bowl and the toilet seat. Takes the porcelain toilet cover and proceeded to beat her to death with it. Awful bloody mess of a scene. I recently went on a ride along and got to hear a number of stories that happened here in Portland. The absolute worst story was regarding a woman who had died in her home. The police arrived, cleared the home, and found the woman laying in her living room. The neighbors hadn't seen her for a while, so they believed she had been there for a number of days. She also had a dog, and when the dog got hungry, it started to eat her face. Her cheeks were gone, skin around her neck and forehead. They started their regular procedures when Mike, the cop I rode along with, thought he heard something and examined her closer. She was breathing. It was faint, but she was absolutely breathing. A stroke or some sort of brain aneurysm had paralyzed her and taken her speech. She had to lay there and literally have her face eaten off her by a dog she couldn't feed. She died later in the ICU. Not a policeman, but I know a former forensic scientist. She described a case one time where a father of two didn't receive custody of his kids after a divorce. He flipped out and kidnapped his kids. A homeless man handed in 2 plastic bags into a police station a few days later of body parts that had been cut up. She had to reassemble the kids' bodies so they could be identified. I mean, where do you start? What do you mean by worst? The saddest scene was a fire where a number of children had died. There is nothing as sad and disturbing as seeing a lifeless child. The most grotesque scene was an obese man who died on the toilet and fell forward onto the lino floor. He lay there for 3 days. We had to peel him off the floor and what used to be his face and chest was now a large amount of maggots and goop. The scene that made me most angry was the home where the big fat husband had thrown his tiny wife around the place and put her head through the plasterboard of a wall. The sight of her cowering and him standing there laughing made my blood boil. Fortunately, he violently resisted arrest. He didn't think he could be arrested in his own home. The most frustrating scene was the RP victim who was too afraid to name her attackers because they were connected to the IRA. That feeling when you can do nothing to bring such a heinous man to justice. 4 uncles sexually abusing 2 minor females. None of the uncles knew the other 3 were doing it. Of course. Now that the young girls are in their 30s and have denounced the actions of their uncles. I have 2. But both not crime scenes. First, decapitated body in a 1-vehicle RTC in Concert Company, Durham, England. Crashed into a stone wall and overturned, somehow decapitating the driver. Second was a sudden death. A flat, the occupants in the downstairs flat complained of a leaking drain from upstairs. Turned out the person upstairs had died, rolled out of bed, and was decomposing on the floor. The leak was the various body fluids from the deceased. Private security here was patrolling the exterior of my building when I smelled it. Once you smell death, you never forget it. What's worse, it was coming from the trash compactor. We have a couple nice restaurants who toss their garbage into the compactor, and a lot of homeless nearby. One of them saw the cooks tossing the garbage the night before and climbed in to grab it. However, the compactor is one of those that will activate when the door closes. Either he didn't know that, or the wind got the door. My dad was a cop and the worst case he ever had was while he was a detective. They caught a local teacher with something 8 full CDs of CP. The most awful thing about it that you have to go through it all to see if you can identify any adults in the pictures to try and get them busted. I'm sick. My friend and his dad are volunteer firefighters. I was staying the night and they got a call at 1 AM. They knew it would be a long call based off of info from their radios. So I went with them. According to a witness, a motorcyclist going about 120 miles per hour was going around a wet corner at midnight past a semi-truck. He leaned too much into the corner, slid across the road, still on his bike. Hit a tree. He disengaged from his bike when he hit the tree and skidded in front of the semi, where the semi smeared him like spreading peanut butter on toast. I stayed in the truck with the windows down, but could see everything due to all the flashing lights. Semi driver was a wreck, crying and sobbing, saying that it happened so fast that he couldn't do anything. I got to watch my friend and his dad pay a guy off the road. Drive safe, guys. Especially motorcyclists. A friend of mine's dad is a cop. He told the story of one time he was called to investigate a fire that was lit in an alleyway. This was midday. He'd yet to eat lunch and had skipped breakfast, and upon arriving to the scene noticed a particularly appetizing aroma coming from the fire. His mouth was involuntarily watering. Turns out, the fire was an ignited carpet, rolled up, with a dead person inside of it. I'm not in law enforcement, but ended up working very closely with them on one case that presented to my ER. Newborn infant had been microwaved by her mother's boyfriend because she wouldn't stop crying after he sorely violated her when changing her diaper. The baby's uncle found the baby and got enough neighbors gathered to set the boyfriend on fire. Police came in first with the baby. They gave me a heads up that the boyfriend might follow, but they decided to wait for ambulance to show up and transport him. Probation officer for violent sex offenders here. I've got a few I could add to this, but this one sticks with me as the worst. A doctor in the children's department at a very popular hospital was ARPing the preteen terminally ill girls during the night shift. This went on a couple times a month for years before he was finally caught. One of the girls lived longer than the doctors expected and complained of pains. During an inspection they discovered the ARP and posted cameras which eventually caught him. He ended up getting probation because he could afford great lawyers who got him in front of a sympathetic judge, and B, most of his victims were dead. He'd up the pain meds before the act so that there would be less resistance. The court never knew the extent of his deviance. But after I finally got his polygraphs back we learned the full story. He eventually died in custody after we got him on a violation. I'm not a cop, but a good friend of mine is, and he recently told me a story. A few weeks ago he got a call to a homicide. A 25-year-old male had killed a 63-year-old male. The victim was a father to a 17-year-old high school girl. The girl had recently began dating a known thug drug dealer. The girl's parents had tried to tell her she couldn't date him, but she did it anyways as an act of rebellion. Long story short, the guy stabbed the father about 30 times with a chef's knife found in the owner's kitchen after an argument ensued. The argument was over him not dating his daughter. Looks like dad was right. When my buddy, the cop, showed up he said the whole kitchen was literally covered in the man's blood. He said the corpse looked like a sliced cow carcass. Both the girl and her mother were sitting in their dead husband's blood crying hysterically. Not in the police, but I just finished serving on a jury for a capital murder trial a couple of weeks ago. Basically a guy beat his 2-year-old son to death, and during sentencing it came out that he molested his 4-year-old daughter as well. As part of the trial we had to view all the forensic photos of this poor kid. 84 bruises, 15 broken ribs, head contusions, brain hemorrhage, lacerated intestine, and the list went on and on. Most of the jurors were shaking with rage when we returned to the jury room that day. I'm a bit late to the party, but here goes. My stepfather worked traffic homicide for years and encountered any number of frankly gruesome things. But the story I remember really sticking out in my mind involved a car hitting an electric pole on a rainy night. The car's occupant had, in the course of the accident, become decapitated, head sheared completely off. The electric pole was severely damaged, one of the lines breaking and falling down to rest in a puddle, which now also contained the severed head. The electrical charge was, apparently, causing the head to bounce and sizzle in a very disconcerting fashion. To put it lightly. Not completely what OP is looking for, but a horrible scene nonetheless. My grandfather's friend was a truck driver for many years. And on one night while he was driving, a car swerved across the median and hit his truck head on. Killed everyone inside the car. And to make it worse, they had just crossed into America legally, so this small sedan had about 6 more people than it should have held stuffed into hollowed out places. So when he hit the car, a red mist just exploded out. He had people stuck up under the hood of his truck and it was a huge mess. Ate him up for a while. Probably ate up any responding officers too. I once went to a scene where her ex-boyfriend showed up at the house where the girl lived. He knocked and then started firing a shotgun through the door, hitting a toddler. He then went in and shot the girl's mother. I still remember chunks of flesh and underarm hair stuck to the wall. Shot the father and then left. The girl was out for the evening. He then left the gun and a suicide knot at the top of a bridge. He went on the run instead of killing himself and was captured shortly thereafter by the marshals. End up scene. My father-in-law is a retired state trooper. He was called to respond to the 2-vehicle accident near his home. That's where he spent his final minutes with his wife before she died trapped in her vehicle. There was a post on here a while ago from a cop where some guy grabbed a baby, put it under his arm and rammed it at the wall using the baby's head as a battering ram. The baby somehow survived and the guy was arrested. A bunch come to mind. Hard to rank them because they are all so unique. One was a 95-year-old lady who lived alone and stopped answering phone calls from her son. He went to her house and found her about a week later. She died while in the bathtub. Her head was resting on the edge of the tub, looking up, with her mouth extremely wide open. She had hundreds of bugs pouring out of her eyes, nose and mouth. It was straight out of a horror movie. You could smell it from the front porch. I felt really bad for her son. No one should ever have to see their mother like that. Posting on the behalf of my friend sitting next to me. Friend's dad is a cop. Keep in mind this was during a really bad ice storm a few years ago. And in the country. About a good 15-20 minutes from a town. And wasn't a very busy road. Got called from a woman saying she hadn't talked to her mom in a few days. Which was weird since they talked every day. Went to go check on her. Drove up to the address. And saw a truck sitting in gate. Got out and walked up. Didn't see anything in or around the truck. Decide to walk past. That's when I saw it. Old lady was by the mailbox. She fell into a puddle and had literally frozen over. Fire department had to come to basically burn her out. Then I decided to walk up to the house after calling in what happened. Door was slightly open. I walked in and announced myself. No answer. Walked around. And her husband had died staring out the window at her. He was handicapped and in a wheelchair. Didn't have any power in the house for a week. And didn't have a cell phone. He died watching his wife freeze to death. Not police. I'm a student studying crime. Went to a lecture given by the head of the missing person department in our country. It's not the worst the guy has seen. He has investigated the type of serial killers that kidnap, pay and murder underage girls in his basement, but it was the story that stuck to me the most. A 6-year-old girl went missing. Search teams couldn't find the girl. All leads ended up nowhere. Eventually after 2-3 weeks of the girl being missing, they find her, dead, body in the trunk of a parked car in a random parking lot. He said that in the missing persons business this is good news. Because bad news is better than no news. After finding the body they drove to the parents' home. He said that when you drive up onto the driveway and are about to open the car door, you realize that 10 seconds later you are going to knock on their door. And 10 seconds after that they are going to open that door and you are going to destroy those parents' lives. My dad's has a friend who was a cop during the IRA bombings in Ireland. Basically my dad's friend and a couple other officers were at a gas station opposite a big field. As my dad's friend tells the story, multiple members of the IRA run out of the field with AK-47s. Rushing up on the officers. They were captured, tied with their hands behind their back, and were forced to kneel down on the floor. Each officer was executed. Until the IRA fighters got to my dad's friend. Right before one of the gunmen pulled the trigger, one of the other gunmen told him to stop. The IRA fighter knew my dad's friend. He told my dad's friend that he remembered him from when he was in jail, and that he appreciated that my dad's friend was nice to him in prison and didn't beat him like the other officers. He said, "I remember you. You can go." So he let me dad's friend go. My dad's friend to this day says he can still see the brains of his fellow officers on the floor. I work at a police department reviewing old cases. I'd say the worst I've ever come across so far was an older man who was found dead in his home by his son. Doesn't sound too bad at first, until you realize that he was found kneeling next to his bed, pants around his knees, Playboy on the bed in front of him, and dick still in his hand. Dead 2 days and found by his son mid-fap. Actually, you would be amazed by how many corpses are found photographed partially or fully naked. A lot of them are found in the bathroom with their pants down, collapsed onto the floor with poop in the toilet on the floor on the person. I'd say 80% of our untimelies are found partially naked with poop somewhere nearby. Comment about suicide followed by a gilded post wherein someone copy-pasted suicide hotlines from around the world. "Hi, I'm super worried about you fam. Here's a helpful number. 5. Also, if you need help with your life, call the sad hotline." That's enough Reddit for today or for the week. Not sure if it was the worst, but definitely the most gratifying once I found out the details as to what happened. Went to a house for a call of a dog loose. Upon entering the house, it looked like a slasher film. Blood smeared all over the walls. Looks like large arterial squirts all over the place on the ceiling, etc. The homeowner had towels wrapped around his leg and arms and was at the point of passing out. All the while a happy pit bull covered in blood was outside looking at me wagging his tail. Got the guy medical attention and retrieved the dog. Turns out the homeowner was beating his dog trying to get it to become fight worthy. Dog turned around and made the homeowner his bitch. Sad that the dog was put down. Dog seemed like it could have been a great dog if it was given a proper chance in a loving home. The Icicle Man. Outside of smaller city in Idaho, Pop. 27K is a kind of shanty town affectionately known as welfare. The only business is a little convenience store a lady runs out of her house. Welfare. ID has at least a 90% unemployment rate. Anyways, it's the dead of winter and around -20 Get a call about a missing persons. A man of 70 hasn't been seen or heard from in over a month. Get to his trailer home and come across the following scene. Man's gas had been shut off due to lack of payment, but electricity was still on. Man had waterbed with an electric heater to warm the water. Looks like man had been stabbed on the bed. He rotted down to essentially a soup-like consistency. His liquefied remains had dribbled off the edge of the heated waterbed to form intricate icicles off the edge. The Icicle Man was the absolute worst. Former paramedic here was called to a murder scene. Not for the victim, but for a rookie female cop who started vomiting and then became catatonic at the scene. A woman had killed her husband with a blast from a shotgun. He was drunk, naked, and farted right in her face at the dinner table. She got the gun, shoved it into his stomach, fired, and blew the back half of his torso away. Then, after he was already dead, she put it in his mouth and blew his head off. The cop was unable to continue and resigned a few days later. Not me by my police trade school teacher told me a story of such a wet up crime scene he was a part of. There was this beautiful woman, could have been a model, and she was naked in the floor of her hotel room, her head not attached to her body and blood everywhere. The entire hotel was a crime scene and my teacher kept seeing cops sneak in to see the hot dead chick, and my teacher, who had command, was furious. Kicked them all out and tried to do his job. Until his higher up, I think a lieutenant, came in by asking around. I heard the hot headless chick was here. I'm pretty sure being headless takes a corpse from hot to not.